Thanks, Fletcher. Ben, give us a different opinion.
Yeah. Go on. Sure, I will. Three waters. I think what often gets lost in the discussion is things aren't automatically good or bad or in favour or against. And so we have to look at the nuance in this. So there's good in it and there's bad in it. It's not just one or the other. And we need to understand what the good is and we need to understand what the bad is. So then when we come to advocating for Rotorua, we can go there and we can say this part of it is not good enough and this is how we think it should be changed. By just saying no to it, full stop, we lose the ability to actually influence it and make change that's beneficial for our community. So, the underlying issue in all of New Zealand and in Rotorua is that councils across New Zealand have done a really bad job of maintaining this water infrastructure. And yes, we have great drinking water here. Yes, we have a good sewage system which needs to be upgraded. But we actually have done a really bad job of stormwater, to the point where our stormwater, the work that we need to do on our stormwater wasn't even put into the long-term plan because the council didn't know how to pay for it in the long-term plan. So it didn't even make it. So there's at least $100 million that we need to invest in stormwater, but the council doesn't know where to get the money. And so this comes back to the fundamental issue that all of this is about, is how do we fund the infrastructure in New Zealand for water, for stormwater, for wastewater and for sewage? And where does that money come from? And yes, I completely agree with everything everyone else has said around the governance, the reporting, the accountability. Looking at the reforms, none of that is good enough. Region 2, there are so many different councils and iwi in that it's difficult to see how the governance and the accountability is going to work in the current model. But we need to see what the government's trying to do. We need to recognise that actually across New Zealand and here in Rotorua moving forward in the future, we need to be investing in our infrastructure. So how do we do that? If this is the only way forward that is feasible, then we need to be advocating on the points that we can win on to make sure that our community is actually going to be better. Thanks.
Now, I'm very much aware that Rotorua is a forestry town and our council actually has a wood-first policy. And the Sound Innovation Building, Te Wharenuiu Tuteata, is an amazing example of the use of timber in construction. However, we're not seeing a lot of progress in using wood in most new buildings locally. What could we do better to implement the wood-first policy that the council adopted in 2014? I'd like to start this time with Tania.
So, Rotorua is the centre of New Zealand's forestry and also wood industry. Approximately 40% of New Zealand's wood is actually harvested within a 100-kilometre radius of Rotorua. So the wider forestry and wood industry is the largest direct employer in Rotorua. So I support a wood-first policy because it acknowledges the importance of forestry and wood processing industry to our district's economy. To do this, to better implement a wood-first policy, what we could do is actually require the council to have a procurement strategy that looks to implement the wood-first policy as a priority, rather than the lowest cost model. So what currently happens when we go out to tender for contracts for new projects, we have a bit of a scale on what are those priorities that we're looking for. By introducing and implementing a wood-first policy, we could be stronger with that procurement strategy to ensure that we're not just going on what's the cheapest option, which is why unfortunately we haven't had as many buildings as possible, but actually putting more emphasis and priority on wood over cost. Also part of these new things that have just come into place called the medium density residential standards, which is all around enabling more housing for Rotorua. There is also a voluntary design guide which does suggest currently the use of sustainable buildings. So council could seek to implement some compulsory design elements through our district plan. These are tools that we do have to ensure that with that development, just like we currently have with Lake Zone A, where design guides are used to hide houses in the caldera by using materials and colours so that they blend into their surrounding environment. But because we do need to build affordable homes, there is always going to be a trade-off, but I do, as Mayor, encourage the use of wood as a preferred sustainable building material for all projects in the district.
Reynold, your thoughts on the wood first policy, or the lack thereof?
The first point is to understand why the Council's wood first policy process actually failed. The philosophical justification of the policy is still sound because Rotorua, as Tania said, is at the centre of New Zealand's sustainably grown and renewable wood crops. So it's a sound policy in its own right. However, the strategies chosen for advancing the policy proved inadequate. Political support nationally and cultural change locally required for the implementation did not eventuate. They were not well managed locally. Consequently, effective management and evaluation of the policy's action plan failed. It was a policy process failure. What's an alternative? Well, let's look at an effective, successful policy process. In British Columbia, their Wood First Act in 2009 required, didn't suggest, it required the use of wood as a primary building material in all new provincially funded buildings. In the years since, there's been an increasing awareness, of course, of the need to turn from fossil fuel energy sources to renewables to meet global needs, and to the benefits of wood as a renewable, carbon sequestering structural resource. So I would push, as your Mayor, I would push hard for sophisticated policy research to identify the extent to which BC's Wood First policy contributed to the recovery of its forestry industry, plus the role of other factors such as demand from the United States housing market and emerging markets in Asia. The cost of this research, I believe, should be shared with potential beneficiaries. But, crucial, the policy research methodology used should be developed in partnership with Scion's experts so that our community can trust the findings. Kia ora tātou.
Thanks, Reynold. And what's your action on it?
Thank you. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Wood First policy. It's just over 2 pages long, so it's not the most extensive document. And it generated a lot of interest, and it still does generate a lot of interest, because we are the home of forestry in the Southern Hemisphere, if not the world. And we need to be supporting the industry. It's good for the environment, it's good for us. But the Wood First policy hasn't had the impact, I'm not sure, that we thought it would have, or, as Reynold has, outlined, an impact that, has really sort of led to solid, growth in this industry. Now that's held back by, and then we have to come back to what council can control and what council can't control. Council is not the government. We have national building regulations, we have the Building Act, we have the Building Code. So, there are things in there which have held this back as well. And so part of the role of council needs to be advocating to make sure that if we have this policy, which we do, that it can actually be implemented in a really successful way. So council can influence its own projects, so requiring that wood is used in the council projects. That's already in the policy. And as your Mayor, I would follow through on that to make sure that that's an absolute requirement. But the other part of this is facilitating and encouraging wider use of wood within New Zealand and making sure that the national standards that we have are also there to support that as well. Now, as Tania mentioned, we do have the Rotorua Intensification Design Guide, which has just been released. Now, it's a 38-page document. There's one mention of Rotorua's Wood First policy in there, and it's only to do with the facade of buildings. So to me, that's an obvious place where we can start. If we are encouraging people to design buildings in Rotorua in a certain way, we should be putting this policy front and foremost and saying, please use wood from here, we have it, we can make these amazing buildings, and we can also support our local economy. The last part of this is we need to work with government as well. So I don't know if you know our courthouse. I'm a lawyer. The courthouse is slowly falling over. The Ministry of Justice will eventually get round to building a new courthouse, but we need to be making sure that if the government is investing and putting new major buildings into Rotorua, that they are also working with our Wood First policy to make sure that, you know, our new court buildings are wood. So that's how I think we should go.
Thank you, Ben. Rania, if you were mayor, what would you do about the Wood First policy?
Oh, if I was mayor, well, I think, you know, looking at Fenton Street for starters, we could do with a whole new facelift, and that would be a good project to start with our Wood First policy. I was excited to come home after working with developers and the building and construction area and see that we had our timber to use, because in Australia in particular everything is steel frame due to termites and other issues. Here we do not have that problem, and I'm thinking, why do we not see more of our timber? And I had an interesting conversation with Callaghan Innovation this morning and meeting with their CEOs, and it was brought up in that even, how do we intertwine and interweave and use the Wood First policy in all our buildings and the buildings of our homes. So I think in terms of what everybody has said, I'm on board. I can't add too much more, but I would certainly, as Mayor, look into bringing our city alive and using our timber and leveraging the use of it with our larger construction companies, our timber companies, our sawmills and the likes.
Thanks, Rania. And Ananda, your thoughts?
Wood First policy. So firstly, I recognize the economic, the cultural and environmental significance of wood within our community. It is plain that the decisions about construction are made entirely on cost. So as council, I will promote and encourage a longer term view. You know, it was just recently I realized that when they use wood, there's all this design parts of keeping the two pieces of wood together. It's an enormous design job and expensive. How can we get our local designers and architects to lead the way in increased use of timber? With what initiatives? Building developments given, and also we need to upscale the planning officers on these new products. I'm happy to say that Red Stag supports our Wood First incentive with its construction of CLT plant, which is right in our backyard here in Rotorua. Thank you.
And Fletcher, you were the last one this time.
I have been a passionate advocate of Wood First, the Wood First policy throughout the country for all of my adult life, since I was 22 years old. And I took that to Parliament, and the fundamentals behind that have been about the nonsensical vision that we all see as we drive by wharves of unprocessed logs being shipped overseas, and the lost opportunity of processing that locally and using our natural resource for the betterment of ourselves and our community and creating jobs here, primarily in Rotorua. I had the same statistics that Tania did written down. I spent 2 years working with Dr. David Clark, Minister, Dr. Stuart Nash, Minister of Forestry, and Dr. David Parker, around why Wood First should be and absolutely should be implemented, not just in Rotorua, but around the country. And you'll be surprised to know it was a difficult argument, and they pushed back all the time. But we did come to a compromise, and we've touched on this before, and we touched on this with relation to carbon emissions. And so as we look to the future, we see wood as an alternative, well, not an alternative, but a more logical material that we can use in construction in terms of our commitment to reducing our carbon emissions. Carbon doesn't disappear into the environment as soon as we chop it down. Yes, some of it does, but a lot of it stays, or predominance of it, I think 90%, stays in the timber. So it's a carbon lock, and it just makes sense for that reason as well. So as your mayor, I passionately continue to be an advocate for Wood First in Rotorua. We know why Rotorua should be the first place for the government to invest. In fact, it was mentioned before, in my role in government, I was able to help fund Red Stag's investment in their cross-laminate investment, help Scion with some of their work, and I will continue to be that passionate cheerleader for Wood First in Rotorua as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fletcher. I think we have enough time to get on to the last question. We've actually, since all the speakers have been very precise in their speaking, we probably can move on to the last question. Keep in mind this is Green Drinks, which in the question have been put together by Forest and Bird and by Green Drinks. So the next question is about urban trees. What policies would you like to introduce to see the planting of many, many more trees, indigenous, exotic, in our district? And I'll start this time with Reynold.
Thank you. The question begins, what policies? Well, I suggest rigorous policy research by our council in collaboration with stakeholders and experts. And Rotorua's got some fine experts in this area. The research question that attracted me was Dennis Hocking's, forgive me Trish. Dennis Hocking's question, what is the right tree in the right place? His 4 research sub-questions were, what's the purpose of tree planting? Over what timescale? What are the characteristics of local ecosystems? How are local conditions likely to change or be affected by climate change? And more generally, do the benefits of trees justify the embrace of exotics and a neglect of indigenous, or vice versa? So, let's customise an urban tree planting policy according to purpose. First, planting for wood production and carbon sequestration is unlikely to be appropriate in urban areas. Planting for ecological reasons would favour indigenous trees and shrubs that support our native bird species. If planting for shelter and shade, then short-term versus long considerations come into play, perhaps starting with exotics and then ushering in indigenous species. If planting for amenity and for interest in private urban environments, then personal taste will have to be respected. Finally, I really like the idea of landowners being provided with free, independent and expert advice on biodiversity and seeing native birds come back to our city. Kia ora tātou.
Thank you, Reynold. Policies for urban trees. Tania, what do you think?
Thank you. I think a big part of the policies for urban trees is actually being aware of and promoting planting in general. So I support a lot of the actions that are currently within the Rotorua Climate Change Action Plan, including increasing exotic and native forestry in the district. And if we can start by investigating opportunities to undertake afforestation on council-owned or public land, I think that's a great way for council to start, because just as a recent example, out near the landfill where there was some land that pine trees were on, we cut those down, made a little bit of money off it, but because it was no longer needed, we actually planted 3.8 hectares of land with 6,600 native trees. Now that's a much better use of that land that previously had pines in an area that wasn't being used. So I do support investigating opportunities to incentivise native forest regeneration, but also supporting community initiatives to plant trees. I really liked these backyard garden projects that we did with council once, which actually encouraged locals to learn how to grow a garden, how to make a garden in their backyard and produce their own food. But I also support the maintenance and protection of our native tree species, including community planting, particularly around our streams, to ensure that we're achieving lake water quality targets. Flats is a really great one for that. So I do like a target as well. This might be a bit ambitious, but for every neighbourhood in Rotorua should have at least 30% tree canopy. Now, some streets in Rotorua look lovely. They've got beautiful trees, blossoms, and some streets in Rotorua have nothing. That's not fair. I would love to see all neighbourhoods having a tree canopy over them. Currently, the council also has a target of a rule that everyone should be able to walk to a park within 500 metres. Well, actually, I would like that to be 300 metres. And while we're at it, let's protect our reserves as important green spaces they are, and plant trees instead of build social housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Tania. Yeah, I would love to comment on the speakers because they're all doing such a marvelous job, but it probably wouldn't be appropriate to say anything, so I'm keeping my mouth shut. So I'd like to ask Fletcher to come up next and talk about urban trees.
Quite simply, I'm in favour of the idea, and I like the idea. There's in the big cities, it's quite clear as to the benefits around absorption of heat and carbon mitigation and carbon sinks, and so, as was touched on before, there are neighbourhoods in Rotorua that are beautifully tree lined and they look stunning. And so, quite simply, my approach and my sense of it would be where can we plant trees to optimise their impact in our community, and let's focus on that incrementally and move forward. There's a lot of benefit to be had. Again, my preference would be around natives, but as Reynold has acknowledged, let's talk to the neighbourhoods. Let's talk to the members of the community about what they want to see in their neighbourhoods. And it is a nice to do. It's more than that. I think it's important as we move forward. So it is definitely part of my vision for Rotorua. Thank you.
Thank you, Fletcher. Ben, trees, what do you think?
Trees, what do I think? Very much in favour of it. And so one of the things that we need to think about is when we talk about nice suburbs in New Zealand, we often talk about leafy suburbs. And then when we talk about neighbourhoods which are poorer, which are lower socioeconomic, we don't say that they're unleafy, but essentially we are. And so we need to rectify this. Like, this has been quite well reported recently up in Auckland. You can drive from certain suburbs into South Auckland and you go from tree-lined streets to streets where there's essentially no trees. You can do exactly the same thing here in Rotorua. And so one of my 3 key things in my plan for Rotorua is supporting our communities. And you can look at my flyer and it's in there. And we need to support communities to make sure communities are more resilient, to make sure that people have a say in their neighbourhoods, that they feel good about their neighbourhoods, that there's a good feeling in their neighbourhoods, and create pride for themselves in their neighbourhoods. One of the things that we can do there is plant trees. Plant trees, they don't just help us with climate change, they don't just slow down the water in terms of entering the stormwater system, but they also increase well-being. So we need to work with communities to plant trees on the berm, in the reserves and around their communities. And this is something that council can actually do straight away. The other thing I wanted to talk about here is that we often have a very sort of black-white difference between nature and urban environments. And we don't need to do that. We can break down that boundary, and Rotorua is probably in a better place than any other city that I can think of to break down that boundary between our urban environment and our natural environment. We can bring more trees into our urban environment. We can create those pathways through our city. We can expand the forest into our city by using key ways and key routes into the city. I'm in favour of eventually getting around to pedestrianising Tutanekai Street. And so what do we want? Like, we already know, if you look at what's happened in Tutanekai Street, that it's generally too wide if you're trying to pedestrianise it. But you can create atmosphere by having green infrastructure, by planting trees down it. We also have Kudau Park. The sports fields there don't have any trees on them because we can't play sports on them anymore. And there's also the 9-hole golf course down at the lakefronts. All of these parks can have trees on them. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben. Ananda, I know you like trees.
Yes.
Tell us
the
about
tree.
Yeah.
The Buddha was enlightened by staring at a tree.
Tell us about trees.
Come on, we need trees. All right. We have so many great initiatives here locally supporting trees. Businesses supporting trees, trusts supporting trees, individuals, volunteers. For example, there's Rotorua rafting. You probably all know what they've planted 3,000 trees. And every Monday together, they work for an hour cleaning up Lake OK Falls. Yes. So, and Tipu Y is a local trust involved in riparian planting. They've worked on Lake Okarika, Lake Tarawera, Lake Rotoma, and with amazing planting initiatives. Zion, and I've recognized some of you, last week, Zion, one of the doctors there, gave a talk on how for 2035 we will be able to meet our emissions. 2035, zero CO2 emissions, how to reach that target. And so what he showed, what he talked about, this is happening also right in our backyard, is that they're planting trees closer together that grow faster. So instead of waiting 30 years to cut a tree and use it, it's 12 years. And by having this faster rotation, they're getting more mitigation of CO2. The tree trust is a jewel. And I know many people that have bought trees from the Tree Trust, and we as the council can also support other programs like this using our nursery. So as a council, we need to put Rotorua first. That's why I'm standing, to put Rotorua first. All of you first. Nurturing our community, this will only be achieved by a fresh approach with fresh eyes to make better decisions for the whole of Rotorua.
Thanks, Ananda. And Rhonda, you last this time.
Lucky last. Thank you, sir. I think I would strongly support and create a policy that sees tree planting just happening far and wide. I spoke to someone, I said, what are your thoughts on urban planting and urban trees? And they just said, plant, 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 plant. And I was privileged to go out to Orchidea Falls and try the new zip line. And as we went on that adventure, we came to the part where we actually got to plant a tree. And Nick actually could probably speak to this better, but, learnt about the tree planting. But I think in society and in our communities, I can say our reserve just down the road within our community, every tree has been chopped down. It's dead. It makes us feel dead. And I just think, what it's like taking life from us. So I think to come in there and I know Rotary also have a volunteer group that put their hand up and they're out like planting trees, helping to clear our forestry ways, but then looking at bringing in the experts to look at, do we want evergreens, do we want natives? There's potential to just go far and wide on this and ensure that we've got trees throughout our urban areas. And I think first and foremost, back in our communities and our reserves, putting them in there, planting our backyards, all starts with us at home in our backyards. Thank you.
Right. thanks to the discipline of our speakers, we've got through in a reasonably good time, and we have a chance now for questions from the floor.
Yes.
We're getting there. Just give me a second. The speakers will have a minute to answer the questions, just to get as many people a chance to speak up. And also, please make it clear if your question is to a specific candidate or to all the candidates, in which case we'll go through them one after another, obviously. So, first question. All right.
I'd like to thank all the candidates for being here. I was a farmer, I'm a trapper, I'm 83 years of age now, gave up the licence when I was 80. I used the bus, walked down tonight from Linmore, about the 20th pair of boots I bought. But I've had my hands dirty all my life. And I'm fit and healthy, and you've got to watch out for the eloquent speech. And I've been involved as a stock agent years ago and all that stuff. But you've got to sort of, Mr. Sandford was quite good with the three waters. I had the regional council out in the forest. There's trouble out there with the sewage.
Are you going to give us a question?
Well, okay. Well, I don't want to question any one of them. They're doing a good job. Yeah, so that's just what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you for that comment.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's just a question, but not a question. Okay?
No, that's cool. Any other question? Yeah.
The last speaks, it's all about the trees, but then Rotorua is known for the views of the lake. And of course, you can't have views of the lake and huge trees. And so the question, my question really is, does the speed humps, why does Carla Point Road have 7 speed humps on that short road? Money left over, did you have 7 speed humps allocated in the plan?
So your question is, if you were mayor, what would you do about speed humps?
Yes.
All right, we can quickly go through that. Do you want to start, Rania? You like, or Tania?
So those 7 speed humps should have never happened. It was an issue with the contractor, and I'm pretty sure they weren't paid until they fixed them, which unfortunately was only grinding them down in size a little bit. So that attention to detail in a new mayor will be very important, even for those issues like individual roads around the district.
Does anybody else want to comment on speed hump questions?
Yes, that's a very practical question, and it indicates to me that one of the needs we have in council is we've got to have functional subcommittees in council that will have strict project management supervision applied and policy oversight by elected members. We'll have to restructure council to ensure these sorts of problems don't occur. Good question. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just wanted to make that comment. That was those 7 speed bumps are a clear example of kind of overreach and a mistake of council. It speaks to a need for better consultation. It also, because all of the feedback, and I've gone all up and down that street, is get rid of them. So, you know, I know there are boy races and stuff, but that's what good consultation needs to be about. And so that would be my commitment.
All good? Yep, good.
Yeah, I agree with what the other speakers have spoken about then. Like, it is good consultation. I actually live just around the corner from those speed bumps and I have to drive over them every day. When they got first put in, they were a bit of a nightmare. I've gotten used to them, and one thing I would say, that at night, the reduction in boy races in that street and the reduction in speeding is actually enormous. It's so big, the reduction in speed, is that my Uber drivers or taxi drivers will actually take me down Kotu Road instead of Kawaha Point Road because it's added, time to their journey. So if we're looking at it from a, does it reduce speed? It's absolutely reduced speed.
This is why it's so important that when we make decisions, we really look in. And then we look in deeper, and then we look in deeper, and we look at all the risks and benefits. And that's something that isn't done. Decisions are made too quick, and then we have to fix things and turn them around.
Any comments, Rania?
No.
Okay. Yeah.
Could about transparency on council-led work. There's been a lot of these workshops which the Chief Ombudsman is about to investigate, and we don't get the result until March, but I think we're a bit concerned. A lot of people are concerned about the decisions that are being made behind closed doors.
Do you want to start on that? Okay.
Yeah, well, I think I'll stand up straight away because it's an easy answer. There have been examples of where transparency has not been appropriate, and so the commitment from me as your next mayor, I hope, is to say that there are some clear and obvious rules that councils need to abide by, and even the ones around commercial sensitivity, some of those can be a bit more flexible, I think. So I make a commitment to make sure that our council meetings are more transparent and there is a greater level of accountability to the public there.
Workshops, actually.
Well, sorry, yes, good comeback. So it's not just the meetings, it's the workshops. And so that's been the debate by the Ombudsman about the appropriate use. And so the rules are clear about what those workshops should look like and how they should function. And so I reiterate my statement. That is my commitment around transparency and accountability.
Do you want to comment, Ben?
Yeah, I agree with Fletcher. I think one of the key things that we want from local government is transparency and accountability. And one of the main ways that as a community we can engage with the council is by knowing what's being discussed, in workshops and around the council table. And so, my commitment to you as your next mayor would be to make sure that as much as feasibly possible, and like Fletcher said, there will be that narrow line of, when things need to be in a workshop because there's some sort of commercial sensitivity, but as much as possible, workshops need to be public as well.
Ananda?
I would reinstate debates by real experts that all of you could view and see. Let's hear from the experts, pros and cons, all the alternatives. And democracy. No closed meetings. They shouldn't be happening. So people know what's going on and it's participatory. Participatory democracy, not consultation. And also, I would like to reinstate what they did 10 years ago, and I think it's a great idea, the telephone, where you vote on the telephone and you push the button if you vote for or against. Then we'd know as a council if we're moving in the right direction. Because Rotorua belongs to you. You make the decisions. We work for you. And that's what has not been happening. We're not pushing the people to the side, making the decisions, and then consulting with them and telling them what's the best for them. No, it's going to be very different.
I want to speak to that too in regards of I've actually attended a lot of these workshops, and a big reason and push for standing was that I didn't feel like there was effective communication or that our voices were being heard. Workshops, you can have a lot of workshops till the cows come home, but what has been taken from those and relayed back, and I think a big push for me standing was the accountability and the transparency and our actual voices being heard, because you can have a workshop, tick the box, and then everything's decided behind closed doors. So,
Any other takers? Reynold?
Yes, that's a fantastic question for me to finish on. After 3 years of enduring elder abuse at council, I know it's time for us to completely transform the way we conduct policy debates. The elected members forums, workshops, the problem with those is they involve people who are not elected. So we've got to have a very clear distinction between the democratic decision making by elected members and the policy advisory processes that are used to inform their thinking. And the other key problem that Tricia's highlighted is that there is too much predetermination of council decisions at these so-called elected members' workshops. That's got to stop. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just going to have to fact check things a little bit. These closed door workshops, they are all elected members. It's our Lakes Community Board, our Rural Community Board, and our elected Te Tata o Charua Board members. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm all for transparency, and I do believe we need to be better informed. and have better community consultation. But I just want to say that there is still a really important time where as elected members we need to ensure that they are all up to scratch with the latest information, what that policy or decision's actually going to create, what's the cost, what's the risk, what's the benefit. And we could sit there for hours around a council table, and let's be honest, not many people would come and listen. Or we could actually have that time, brainstorm the ideas, make sure elected members are up to scratch with information, and then be able to go on and make a decision. There are not decisions made in the workshop. That's a very clear rule. That review that is going into the workshops is happening with a number of different councils just to see how local government as a sector can do better. But don't be wrong, I am all for transparency, and I do want to ensure that our community are well informed, especially as we go into challenging decisions like Three Waters, museum funding, and also the housing that we're going to need here in Rotorua.
Thank you, Tania. Yep, I have a question at the back.
Hey, a lot of candidates often campaign on a return to core services for council. In 2013, the National Government removed environmental concerns as a core service of council in the Local Government Act. In 2018, the Coalition Government reintroduced it as part of the four wellbeings. Just interested to know what the candidates think about environmental concerns remaining in the Local Government Act.
Any takers?
Yeah, great question. Is that you, Brian?
Thanks,
Yeah. Hey, great question, man. So, yes, part of that coalition government that brought that back. So, I think that gives me an opportunity to speak to something that I haven't had a chance to speak to, and that's localism, right? So, a lot of the angst that we're feeling out in the community is this kind of big bad government making decisions and not really involving us and disconnecting us as voting citizens from that decision-making process. And I sincerely believe not just the environmental but the other well-beings gives us an opportunity as a council who I believe are and should be better connected to their communities to make decisions of the people for the people. And I think that's fundamentally where I want to see council heading. Now, the only thing I would add to that is that the council, as we all know, is committed, its debt levels are massive, and so it will be more about holding government to account as well on contributing to those, in your case, environmental well-beings.
You want to have a go at it?
Sorry, I cut your applause off. Yeah, thanks for the question. I think it's incredibly important that that the environment is one of the well-beings that council has to consider. If we want council to be looking after the community. We want council to be taking into consideration the well-being of the community when it makes a decision. And by having it there in the Local Government Act, it ensures that it's happening. If it's not there, then there's no guarantee that those decisions will be made for, the well-beings that we hold dear. And the environment is one of those. We need to look after our environment. We need that to be in the Local Government Act, and we need to make decisions looking after, the sustainable future of our environment as well. So 100% in favour of that.
You want to?
I think it's important to note that the council has always had an obligation for the environment, whether that was through the Resource Management Act or the Local Government Act. But what was new when the government reintroduced the four wellbeings was actually the social and the cultural wellbeings. Now, fortunately in Rotorua, we've quite advanced in terms of supporting our local culture, but the social wellbeing actually also meant that when things like the pandemic came along, council reallocated staff to help with the COVID-19, whether it was vaccinations or community support packages for food. But again, these are things that the government gave to us without any additional funding, without any additional resources, and we actually had to foot that bill with either our staff being allocated to new jobs or having to pay more. So while I do support the environment being there, absolutely, I think we need to have a stronger look when we say, yes, let's get back to our core infrastructure. Let's get back to what you actually expect council to do with your ratepayers' money. And if that job falls under the responsibility of the government or the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, who looks after air, water and land, then we should be giving them the bill instead.
I thought you were in the starting blocks there. Yeah,
thank you. To be brief on this one, when the change to the Act occurred, and we were given the additional responsibilities of social, cultural, economic and environmental well-being, at the same time there was no funding allocated. It was an unfunded mandate. And ever since then, local councils have struggled to pay their bills, struggled to invest sensibly, have often had to cut back on things like stormwater, freshwater, and in particular wastewater management. So our current financial crises date from that time. It's an appalling mistake by central government. Forgive me. Thank you very much.
Any other takers for that question? Okay. I'll have to take one from the front for a change.
Somebody over there.
Yeah, we'll go through them. I won't forget you, I promise.
I was just wondering if anyone had any great ideas of what council can do to make the inner city vibrant again, because it's not.
Repeat the question.
To make if any ideas about what the council can do to make the inner city vibrant.
You can start. Shall we give Ben the start this time? But remember, Ben, it's 1 minute. I know you can talk about this for longer. And you next, Tania.
Yeah, I totally agree. We need to make sure that the inner city is vibrant and that it's a hub for all of our city. We need to make sure that we have public spaces, where people feel like they belong, where they feel like they can engage, and where we feel like we're a community at one together. And for those reasons, we do need to revitalise the inner city. There are good proposals on paper, hidden in the documents. Like, I would love to see us pedestrianise Tutanekai Street. I think we can do it gradually, and we can do it by working with the business owners to individualise those segments of Tutanekai Street. Lighting is a really easy one. And so, having good lighting in the inner city, having lighting which actually creates atmosphere, which actually creates interest, that's a really easy way to, promote a nighttime economy. And so this is another thing that you'll hear me talk about during the campaign, is we often think only about the daytime economy and how the inner city looks during the day, but we also have to think about how it looks at night. So, and that's not just about bars and drinking, that's about having facilities that are open at night, having services that are open at night, and I would carry on talking about my
Thank you. So I really wanted to answer this question because I've already committed to some of my top priorities for the inner city around having a safe community. So strong investment into community safety, which will actually make people want to not only walk about easier for the residents, but also, importantly, for the perception of those visitors who are visiting us. As part of the Rotorua development strategy that I've committed to you as your new mayor, is also about revitalising the inner city. Let's actually bring new apartment living in there. We're on the first story, on the first ground floor, we can have new cafes, retail opportunities. First floor might be offices, and then above that, apartment living. But it's important that we're allowing and giving those opportunities for productive members in the community, but also revitalising the inner city with an important housing option of 1 to 2 bedroom units. We don't have that. Most of our homes are 3 bedroom units on a really big section. So let's actually allow housing opportunities, revitalise city, but most importantly, my top priority, a safe community.
The first and foremost is to acknowledge the problem that's occurred over time, in that our population is not large enough at the moment to create that energy. We've got all these kind of satellite malls and shopping centres, and so now we're struggling to bring people into our CBD. So it's about revitalising that centre, but it's also about safety in our community, which is one of my top priorities. It's about actually incentivising people to come and work and live in Rotorua. And that's going to be a big part of what the mayor will need to do in terms of cheerleading and advocating and reminding people, not only living here already, but those out in the rest of the New Zealand and the world, that, man, we live in the most beautiful city in the world. We need to remind everyone of that, and we should be proud of it. Come and live here. Come and base your business here. Come and be a proud Rotorua citizen. And with that, I will walk alongside businesses who are willing to invest in the revitalisation of our central city, including accommodation and retail, and commit the council to walking alongside of those investments. Thank you very much.
Any other takers for that question? Reynold?
Yes. It's like many others that I've spoken to, a lot of people have a vision of the CBD being completely revitalised. I mean in economic, social, cultural and in environmental senses. We had Greg Brown's think tank group that worked assiduously for 6 or 7 months, put together a plan, the following, and it was announced, we had a big meeting in a motel, and it was widely applauded for the work, the thinking, the creativity of that plan. The following day, Council announced another plan. Since then, nothing has happened. We need to revitalise that policy process. And finally, the argument about restoring foot traffic is absolutely appropriate. Without a massive population boost in the CBD area, it's just not going to work. Thank you very much.
Any other speakers for that question? Ananda?
Yeah, how do we get the people into the town is the question. How do we get them into the centre of town and walking around? What can we do? Lighting. You mentioned lighting, yes, but we have so many artists. We have carvers. We have musicians, singers. Why can't we bring them, highlight them, have a night where they come and they talk, or have markets. We have a Thursday market, and that's great. You know you're going to see people, you'll see friends, you'll have something to eat. We've started doing it. We just need to do more and involve all of the rich artists and artisans that we have here in Rotorua. We can make Rotorua also a little brighter to look at. There is some painting that needs to be done, and we need some stores still filled in. And again, instead of having our sculptors at Tupuia, why can't we bring them into the storefronts? Why can't we show people that come to visit, look at what they're carving, etc., painting, designing. Thank you.
Thanks, Ananda. Do you want to speak to that question, Rania? Okay, cool. So we had a question over there. Before I take that question, maybe for the next question, can I go through the speakers in order so that we don't play musical chairs? Okay. Please.
Could you please speak to fluoride added in the water, given that it removes a choice?
Okay.
Could you repeat the question?
Fluoride in the water. What? Okay, do you want to repeat it in your words?
Can you speak to the addition of fluoride in the water, given that it reduces our choice?
Okay.
I'll speak to that.
Any takers? Yeah, Ananda? Oh, well, I'm violating my own rules here straight away, aren't I? Anyway.
We need choice. I believe in choice. And I don't think that we need to fluoridate the water for everybody. So my solution to and I believe in pure water. The water, I mean, the purer it is, the better it is. So my solution would be this. For those people, because we have to consider everyone, right? For those people that want fluoride, we can provide fluoride tablets, free fluoride tablets at the council. And let's keep our drinking water and our water clean and pure with no contaminants.
Okay, now let's go through. Did you want to answer that?
Yes, I would want to look into that a lot further, because there's pros and cons to that. I know Australia have fluoride in their water, and when I took my youngest daughters to the dentist back here, he actually stated that their teeth were in such good condition, and probably due to the fluoride in the water. But my personal take is I think keep it pure. Why? And like Ananda said, you know, maybe possibly keep it a choice, but for me personally, no, keep our water pure, and anything we don't have to put in there, leave it out.
respond, Reynold?
Well, my position's a little different, folks. Scientific knowledge about health policy moves slowly and carefully, and sometimes governments overreach with the development of mandates. And that's one of the disturbing factors that some people have highlighted. But the other factor here is that it's not within the Council's jurisdiction to make a decision in this area, and so I would leave it to the Ministry of Health, who have made a decision, and it's within their legal rights to do so. But secondly, it is consistent with recent medical research. As far as I understand it, this is not my field. So those are my views, a little different, perhaps disappointing, I'm sorry.
Yes, so my response is very similar. When I have been on council when fluoride came to the table, and it was a really hard one because personally I would like to see the water kept pure as well. But what I really struggled with is the fact that I'm not a scientist and I'm not an expert, but as elected members of the community, we were given the task of making that decision. So I may not be a scientist, but I do listen to scientists, and I do think that the appropriate people to be making that decision is the Ministry of Health, and we do know that many of our children have appalling conditions of dental and teeth care. So if that means that I need to get a filter because I don't want that in my water, but will save a generation of people going through the pain, the heartache, and actually the impact that that has on them for the rest of their lives if their teeth are not well, then I would be happy to support it coming through.
Mine's a simple answer to that. I've been an advocate of public referendum all my political life, and fundamentally this question has been asked of Rotorua residents for decades, and every time they've said no. Now, my personal views on fluoride are irrelevant. It is the practicality around asking you, what do you want in your water? And that would be my position as the Mayor, to ask the residents of the Rotorua district.
Yeah, that all sounds very well, but the government's actually taken that decision away from us. And so it's not actually, what we believe personally. It's not even what we can do in case of advocacy, because there doesn't seem to be any room to advocate here. The Ministry of Health has made a decision. There is going to be fluoride in the water, and that's what the decision is. So, like Fletcher said, my personal opinion on it, doesn't really matter. Like, I can see the benefit from having it in the community. We obviously have a large portion of our community is lower socioeconomic. They have, long-term dental issues as a result of not having fluoride in the water at the moment. But you do have to follow the scientific advice, and it's the Ministry of Health which is making this decision. And my aunt in Hamilton has been an anti-fluoride campaigner for as long as I can remember. So I've read the books, and I've had her argue with me at every single breakfast possible. But she does have a filter on her tap to get rid of the fluoride, so that maintains her choice in that decision making.
Can I just add one thing? It's more than just putting something on your tap. See, and that's the unfortunate thing, because you'll be bathing in it, you'll be washing your vegetables in it, and so for a person, a family that wants to not have fluoride, it's a very expensive system that you're going to have to put in. So it's not just a simple little thing. So we have to think of all those people that don't have the money or don't want the fluoride.
Okay, thanks, Ananda. I think I will have to wrap it up. I'm sure lots of you have still burning questions left, but the idea of tonight was to give you a feeling for the candidates. So when you walk out the door tonight, you know what candidate will resonate with you and what do you want to vote for. I clearly felt that, thank you, all of you have really spent a lot of thought on those questions that we put together, so thank you very much for that. I was very impressed, I have to say. Before we wrap up, just one quick word from Miriam, who wants to tell us about something very exciting that she found out. Do you want to quickly have a stint on that?
Very briefly, I was in at Salt and Tonic yesterday and spoke to Matt from Salt and Tonic about an app they've developed along with council. So if you have further questions, I've put a piece of paper, which I hope is still there at the door, for the Select app. So it's S in square brackets, elect. And it has on it not only the mayoral candidates, but also all the candidates for council, the community boards, etc. And you install the app, and it gives you an opportunity to read all their bios, see who all of them are, and ask. If you log in, you can ask questions, and any decent candidate will give you an answer.